Good evening, everyone. And tonight we return to the adventures of Eliyahu and Elisha. Now we're starting with Elisha, right? And we're kind of ending Eliyahu's story and beginning Elisha's story. Remember that we said last time when Eliyahu gets this he has this revelation, and it seems like the revelation is supposed to change his mind, and it doesn't. Right? He's supposed to come to a realization that his role at this point is not to say terrible things about the people of Israel, but instead it's supposed to switch to the other role of the prophet, which is asking for mercy for the people, or maybe just trying to get them, go out and try to get them to repent, but a more merciful approach. And he doesn't change. He says the exact same thing. Even after his revelation of what is God, God is the still small sound, like a soft sound. God's not in the thunder or the earthquake. God's not in these major tempests. God is in this quiet voice, this quiet noise that he's supposed to be using. And it doesn't change his outlook. And that's when he's told, okay, you're going to anoint 3 different people, and they are going to essentially move everything into the new generation. One of them is Elisha, who's going to be your successor. And the only person that one is, the next enemy of Israel, one is the next king of Israel, and Elisha, who's going to be the prophet of Israel. And what he does is, he does in fact choose Elisha, right? He throws his cloak to him. He doesn't anoint him. I think it's a little bit nitpicky. Say, oh, he didn't pour oil on his head. Okay. But he does choose him. Elisha, he says to Elisha, hey, buddy, you don't get to say goodbye to your parents. You just have to come. And Elisha accepts that at the same time as he does something for the people around him, right? He takes the cattle that he's been leading, he slaughters them, and he serves a meal to people around him. And that's going to typify Elisha's approach as opposed to Eliyahu's approach. Eliyahu is very much the wandering individual prophet, while Elisha is always going to be dealing with people, and he's going to be in situations where people come to him for help, for advice, for prophecy, etc. Now, one of the things, of course, that we're going to see is that this is not all sweetness and light, right? Elisha also has that aspect of him which is quite dangerous because he's supposed to be a prophet. But we haven't gotten there yet. Right now, we're at the end of Eliyahu's kind of tenure as prophet. Any questions about that summary before we continue?
I don't have questions about the summary, but from Eliyahu, we have no background. Like he appears and
he comes out of nowhere. Now, again, the fact that we have his place, this is always a question because these stories are coming, they really do seem to be coming from a different source. In other words, it seems like there are more sources of these stories, and they don't always seem to agree with each other. So, for example, Eliyahu is told to anoint kings, and he doesn't. Elisha does that. All right. And we don't even kind of get this thing that Eliyahu says to Elisha, now you're going to anoint these kings in my place. We don't see that. We're going to see another case where there is just a crazy contradiction between a story ends one way, and then the next story starts in direct contradiction. I'm not going to give you any, I'm not going to drop spoilers, but there are contradictions between stories. There seems to be a larger collection of Eliyahu stories and of Elisha stories. So it's very possible that we have, more in kind of the stories that people were telling. There was a lot more known about Elisha. Frankly, the way we have Elisha in our story, it works really well that we don't know anything about his background because he's that kind of mysterious, really unusual guy, right? He's very harsh. He's very, mysterious. It's always interesting to me if we're going to go. When we're going to get into the Elisha stories, that there are a lot of Elisha stories, right? There's a lot of stuff about Elisha. At the same time, he doesn't have the same heft moving forward, right? Afterwards, who do we talk about all the time? We talk about Eliyahu. Because, of course, Eliyahu had the the whole miracle at Har Carmel, at Mount Carmel. He has the revelation at Chorev, right? We have these major points with Eliyahu, whereas Elisha is just kind of doing what prophets do, but more so, and with lots more miracles. Lots of miracles, right? But the person that we remember more is Eliyahu, as opposed to Elisha. And again, it's this, that Eliyahu is this kind of a tremendously symbolic character. Also, let's face it, you get taken up in a chariot of fire. That kind of gets you some points, right? Like afterwards, people are going to be like, yeah, I mean, that's a big deal. So that's also, Eliyahu gets the big moments. And Elisha, that we have a little bit more information. We know he comes from apparently a wealthy family. He wanted to say goodbye to his parents, but didn't. And so we know a little bit more about Elisha. And then we know that Elisha is hanging out a lot more with these B'nai Nevi'im, with this prophetic guild that has him kind of very much involved with their welfare. And again, I'll just remind you that those B'nai Nevi'im, the prophetic guild, seems to particularly function in the northern kingdom in this period, right? Achav and his descendants, that seems to be when they're really flourishing. Okay, so.
But Miriam, sounds like you're saying that Kings doesn't resolve any of the contradictions. Whoever edited it or wrote it just.
Okay, yeah. So we'll see in at least one place that the contradiction is not resolved. It doesn't seem like whoever brought these stories together was bothered that much by the contradictions. They also hop around a little bit. It seems like in terms of time, because they bring stories a little bit out of their chronological order sometimes. And they don't seem bothered. There's one particular contrast that kind of takes you aback. But yeah, right. So like you can easily say, well, Eliyahu was told to anoint, but Elisha was continuing his job and he did the anointing. At the same time, it really sounds like what you're expecting right after God's like, okay, you're going to anoint these 3 people, is for him to anoint those 3 people. That is kind of what you're expecting in the story cycle, right? It works. Possibly there are 2 versions, one where Eliyahu did it and the other where Elisha did it. And the ones where Elisha did it worked better in terms of the chronology of the story, right? In terms of which kings were being anointed and when, it worked better if Elisha did it. And so that was the story that was chosen to get in, because that made more sense chronologically. Maybe, this is just a guess, right? So yeah. Okay, so let's dive right in. I will share the screen and you can all follow along. Here we go. Okay. Does everyone see my screen, which is Melachim Bet? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so we're reading now from Melachim Bet, 2 Kings, the very end. And this kind of, so this is yet another story of, this is after Achav dies, right? So just to remind you, if we go back a chapter, right, that Achav and Yehoshaphat went to war, and they essentially, and Achav is killed and he is buried, but in order to kind of fulfill the prophecy that dogs would lick his blood, he was killed in the chariot, they washed the chariot in the river, and the dogs licked that blood. It's kind of a roundabout way of the prophecy coming true, because the meaning of the prophecy was, of course, that he wouldn't be buried, and Achav is buried. All right. Achav slept with his fathers. He was buried in the family tomb, right? And Achaziyahu, his son, rules after him, and that's important. Not only did Achav die and was buried, I mean, he died in battle, he didn't die in his bed, but he's buried. Also, his son also takes over from him, which is another thing which we were not expecting really based on the prophecies. But if you remember, Achav felt so bad that things got kind of softened up for him. Okay. So here we have, Yoshaphat. So we're going to moving right along. And here we have what was the story with Achaziyahu, the son of Achav. He was king over Israel in Shomron in the 17th year of Yoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, and he ruled for 2 years, really probably just under 2 years. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, he did evil in the eyes of God. He went in the way of his father and his mother, b'derech avivu b'derech imo. Why his father and his mother? Because that means he's continuing the worship of Baal, as we'll see explicitly said later, and also b'derech Yerav Am ben Nevat. Yerav Am ben Nevat, of course, the one who established worship of God, of the Lord of Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh, outside of Jerusalem, right? So he's worshiping God and worshiping Baal in various places. And he worshiped Baal and he bowed to him. And he got the Lord God of Israel angry, just as his father had. Okay, and now we can go with that background, we can jump right into our next Eliyahu story. Okay, so Moab rebels after Achav is dead. So this is a standard thing. You have a very powerful king, and when that powerful king dies, the vassal states are like, this is exactly the time to rise up. Moab was acting as was a vassal state, so now that Achav is dead, they rebel. Okay, at the same time, Vayipol Achazia be'ad hasvacha ba'aliyato asher b'Shomron vayachal. So Achaziyahu is walking on his like kind of like lattice, like kind of it seems like the porch by his upper room, something like that, and he fell and he was sick, meaning he was injured really, and he sends messengers whereby Yomer Alehem L'chud Yershu B'Va'al Zvuv Elohei Ekron Im Echya Mechalizeh. He sends messengers to whom? To Baal Zvuv. Who is Baal Zvuv? Baal Zvuv is probably Baal Zevul. We changed it to Baal Zvuv to make fun of him, right? The same way Baal is frequently in Tanakh in the Hebrew Bible changed to Boshet, right? So you have Ish Boshet, whose name was almost certainly Ish Baal, and we changed the word Baal to Boshet, shame, because we don't want to say Baal, right? So Yerubal was probably you see Yeruboshet instead of Yerubal, things like that. Same thing here. It was probably Baal Zvul. Okay. In fact, we have actually in the Gospels, in the better manuscripts, he's called Baal Zvul also, not just Beelzebub, but Beelzebul, right? And Zvul would mean that we know from Ugaritic manuscripts that Baal is called. Let me see if I can find where would that be? Hold on. I will tell you. He is called, yes, he is called Zavul Baal Aretz. So which means Baal of the noble land, or Baal of the noble Baal of the land, right? So that's one kind of so that's kind of an expression. I imagine that Baal Zavul was more of a common name, like a little bit more specific maybe than in Ugaritic. But anyway, and he says the god of Ekron. Remember the idea that the god Baal could be different depending on where he was. The same that people were saying about the God of Israel, right? That, the God of Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh who was in Dan, Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh was in, these different places. So we have Baal Zavul who was in Ekron. Sent to him to find out if I'm going to live. There was a belief that Baal was good at curing diseases. Okay. I see a question. Doesn't Zvul mean sanctuary or temple? I think that in this case, it's not considered that way. I don't know why in the Ugaritic they don't translate it that way, but they don't. I'll tell you the truth. I didn't look too much into the etymology here of Zvul, but that's not how they explain it, particularly with Baal. Okay, moving right along. So Umalach Hashem diber Eliyahu Tishbi, right? And an angel of God spoke with Eliyahu Tishbi. Kum ale likrat malachem melech Shamron. Get up and go up and to meet the messengers of the king of Shamron. V'daber alehem, and speak to them. Hamibli ein Elohim b'Yisrael. Atem hochim lidrosh b'Baal Zvuv Elohei Ekron. He says, is there no God in Israel that you're going to ask of Baal Zvuv in the God of Ekron? V'lachen kol amar Hashem hamita asher alita sham lo tered mimena ki mot tamut. V'yelech Eliyahu. So he said, and so says God. Therefore, says God, because you're asking kind of the wrong God, as it were, because therefore the bed that you went up on it, you will never descend from, because you shall die. You shall surely die. And Eliyahu went. Okay. Vayashuvu hamalachim elav, and the messengers came back to him, namely to the king. Vayomar lehem ma zeshaftem. The king says, why are you already back? What's going on? So clearly, this is Vayelech Eliyahu. Eliyahu went means Eliyahu went and did this. He went and he told them this, and so they go back to the king to tell him. Vayomar elav isha la lekratenu. Vayomar elenu lechu shuvu el hamelech asher shalach etchem. And they said to him, a man went up to meet us, and he said to us, go back to the king that sent you. V'dibartem elav kol amar Hashem, and you should say to him, so says God, Hamibli ein Elohim b'Yisrael, ata sholech lidrosh b'Baal Zvuv Elohei Ekron. Is there no God in Israel that you are going to send to ask from the Baal Zvuv who is in Ekron, who's the God of Ekron? L'chein hamita asher alita sham lo tered mimena ki mot tamut. And therefore, the bed that you went up on, you shall not come down from, because you shall surely die. This is always interesting to me, because this whole thing of don't shoot the messenger, and we have this idea that in the ancient world, if you came with a bad message, you were dead. I don't think this doesn't seem to really be true. I think especially with prophets, and again, it's not just in Israel, it's in general. If a prophet tells you something, that's important information that you must relate to the king. The king can decide the guy's a traitor or not. The king can decide that he's telling the truth or not. But this is important information, and you've got to report it to the king. And he says, and he says, not what we would expect actually ma mishpat ha'ish to mean. Okay, what am I going to do to him? What's the judgment of the man? No, it means, what's the guy like? Asher Allah lekratchem, who went up to meet you. And who said these things to you. Vayomru elav ish bal se'ar ve'ezor or azor b'motnav. And they said it's a hairy guy, and he's got this leather kind of girdle girding up his loins. Vayomar Eliyahu Tishbihu. He says, oh, it's Eliyahu Tishbi. In other words, Eliyahu is well known. Everyone knows what he looks like. It's got to be him, right? And then what he does is he starts sending officers of 50 to grab Eliyahu. So Eliyahu goes, he tells the messengers his message, then he goes back to the mountain, okay? Which he got I don't think we know the mountain. No, he goes up to the top of the mountain, and the king knows where he is, and he starts sending officers of 50 with their 50 soldiers to go up to get Eliyahu. So the officer of 50 goes up with his 50 men, and there's Eliyahu sitting at the top of the mountain. He says to him, man of God, the king has spoken, come down. ואם איש אלוהים אני, תרד אש מן השמיים ותאכל אותך ואת חמישך. ותרד אש מן המים ותאכל אותך ואת חמישך. So he says to the officer of 50, he says, well, if I'm a man of God, may fire come out of the sky and consume you and your 50 men. And that's exactly what happens. Fire comes down, consumes him and his 50 men. Okay, he sends another one, same thing happens, same dialogue, and he gets consumed by fire with 50 men. Okay, so this happens twice. Third guy, now we have the rule of 3. here's this poor guy. 2 other officers of 50 men have been consumed along with their men. And here's the 3rd one, and he's coming, right? So what does he do? He gets up to Eliyahu. So the 5th officer over 50 men gets there. And he bowed on his knees. He kneeled on his knees opposite Eliyahu, and he pled with him. He begged him. He spoke to him. Ish Elohim, man of God. He said, may you take care, may you value my life and the life of these 50 men, right? May their lives have value in your eyes. He says, now he says, I know that fire came down from heaven and consumed the previous 2 officers with their men, but and now let my life be worth something in your eyes. They be precious, but it's really just value it, right? So what settles Eliyahu seems to be not displeasing. We know that Eliyahu is not particularly known for his mercy. But the angel says to him, go with him. Don't be afraid of him. And he gets up and he goes down to the king. So now we understand why Eliyahu wasn't coming. He was like, you're taking me to the king for the king to kill me, so I'm not going to come with you, right? So in the 3rd one, the guy pleads, and then the angel says, listen, go with him. You don't have to worry. It feels like his pleading is what gives him the merit to have the angel say to Eliyahu, go with him already, as opposed to his pleading having an effect on Eliyahu. Unless you could read it saying, Eliyahu then wanted to go, and the angel's like, yeah, it's cool, you can go, right? Don't worry. Okay, and then so he goes to the king. He says exactly the same thing that we've heard already to the king. He's like, because he sent to Baal Zevub and Ekron, is there no God in Israel? Therefore, the bed that you went up on, you're never coming down from. You're going to die there, okay? And he dies. Vayimloch Yehoram tachtav, and Yehoram rules after him. B'shnat shtayim liYehoram ben Yehoshaphat melech Yehuda ki lo haya lo ben. So he had no son. So Yehoram rules after him. V'yetu divrei Achaziyahu asher sah halo hem ketuvim al sefer divrei hayamim l'malchei Yisrael. He's like, and the rest of Achaziyahu's stuff is written in this book that we don't have, right? A book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. So now we have as king Yehoram. So what's the story with Yehoram? I'm going to take a pause now because I see a question. Okay. Ekron is in Philistia, where the kingdom of Israel and Philistia even contiguous. I think that because Philistia was on the coast, that yes, the kingdom of Israel was contiguous. I don't think they would have to go through Yehuda to get to Philistia. Even if they did, I don't think it would have been that big a deal. Like, I don't think anyone would have stopped them. I think they would have been able to go through Yehuda without too much of a problem. And the whole idea is that he's sending messengers far away, right? He's sending messengers far away specifically to this god, this Baal Zevul in Ekron, right? And that's part of the reason also that explains also certain things in the story where he's like, why are you back? Because he wasn't expecting them back for a while because he was sending them far away relatively. So it is part of the story that he's sending them relatively far away for this question. It's not even like, oh, right next door. He's sending them far away as if there's really no, that's it. That's the God I need. So moving on. Here we are. Okay. And it came to pass. Okay, so
Miriam?
Yes.
I wonder if there's significance in the fact that the father Achav seeks gods from the north, from Phoenicia, and the son Achaziah sort of rebels against and seeks gods from the south, from the other direction.
Yeah, it's interesting that he would send to Ekron and not go with his local Baal. Part of it is that he needs it, is that it's you need it for first of all, you need it for the story, right? Because he's got his own temples to Baal. We know that he's continuing what Achav and Izebel did. So he's got his own temples to Baal. Apparently that's not good enough. He needs the Baal that's in Ekron, right? I mean, again, I think the Baal Zevul is a specific name of a specific Baal that he wants to get to. So
I'm wondering if there's a point to be made here that one king goes northward, the other king goes southward, anything but to do what's in the middle and to the God of Israel.
That's cute. That's cute. I like that. I like that. Of course, with Achav, a lot of the whole northern thing was that very important alliance that he made by marrying Izebel, which is, which historically was a tremendously important alliance and which contributed to the prosperity of the Israelite kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel when Achav was the ruler, right? As I'm sure many of you know, from a secular perspective, Omri and Achav were considered very successful rulers, right? And part of that were these alliances they built with the north. But it is interesting. It is interesting. I accept what you're saying. Like, yes, it could be that there's a kind of a play here that like north, south, west, as long as it's not in Israel, right? As long as it's not the God of Israel, that's where they'll go. Okay, so now right after this story, so we've moved on. We're now out of Achav's dynasty. Okay. And now I see that there's another chat. So Moshe Matitya says, perhaps the Baal in the north fell out of favor after being humiliated by Eliyahu and after he had all their priests put to death. I would have said so, except that it says specifically that he's worshiping Baal in his kingdom, right? So it says specifically that he's continuing the path of his mother and father, and then it specifically says, and he's worshiping Baal. He's kneeling to Baal. And that would indicate that he has a local temple to Baal. One assumes actually at Shomron. So I don't think that they're that discredited. And let's not forget this is Izebel's son, right? So it would take a lot to discredit Baal for him.
Miriam,
yes.
Do we know which gods did the Philistines worship to? Because, Baal is the Canaanite god. Is it just the Canaanite god that the Philistines took, or they had other gods?
They have other gods. I mean, I do think that Dagon was being worshipped at this time also, Dagon, right? Dagon. And I'm sure, I'm not up on all the Philistine gods, but everyone's kind of worshiping multiple gods. Like they're even bringing, at a certain point, they're bringing in gods from Egypt. Also, they're worshiping them because why not, right? I didn't even think of looking up, all the different gods they're worshiping in among the Plishtim at this time, but it's not a surprise that they worship Baal. Baal is a pretty kind of as a god of the area, he's pretty well known. So sorry, I can't shed any further light on that one. But the one I always think of is Dagon, right? But I don't know offhand. Anyway, so here we are, moving right along, and now we're kind of just jumping to Eliyahu and his ascension. Okay, and Vayihi, right? And it came to pass. They said it came to pass, and it was, right? And we have just a summary. There's no real teaser here. It's just a spoiler right up front. And it was when God took up Eliyahu in a storm to the heavens, right? We already know what's going to happen. This is not going to surprise us. So Eliyahu and Elisha traveled from the Gilgal. Note that in our previous story, we didn't hear about Elisha at all, right? Again, because these stories you can't just read them as stories from a single, let's say, book that all work together, right? It seems like a collection of stories from different places that are relevant in different ways, right? So we needed the previous story because it explained the end of Achav's son, right? And now that we have that, we can move on to Eliyahu and Elisha, and the passage of kind of prophecy of the scepter, of like the prophetic scepter, as it were, as being like the main miracle working prophet from Eliyahu to Elisha. Okay. So they go from Gilgal, Vayomer Eliyahu, Elisha, Shev Napo. Now Eliyahu really doesn't want Elisha to see this, right? Eliyahu wants Elisha to stay behind, and Eliyahu is going to do this really cool thing, right? Vayomer Eliyahu, Elisha, Shev Napo, Ki Hashem shlachani ad Beitel. And he says, you stay here, right? Eliyahu says to Elisha, you stay here, because God's sending me to Beitel. Vayomer Elisha, Chai Hashem v'chein avshecha me'ezveka. Beitel. He's like, by God, I'm not going to leave you, right? And by God in your life, I'm not going to leave you. And they go down to Beitel. ויצאו פני הנביאים אשר בית אל אלישע, ויאמרו אליו, הידעת כי היום אדוני לוקח את אדונך מעל ראשך? ויאמר גם אני ידעתי החשו. So here you hear the sons of prophets, right? Those just general like prophets, those professional prophets that are in Beitel, they go to Elisha and they say to him, did you know that today God's going to take your master from you? And he's like, yeah, I know too, right? Just be quiet, right? And you can kind of hear the exasperation. Vayomer lo Eliyahu Elisha shev napo ki Hashem shalchani yericho. Right, and then Eliyahu says to Elisha, now you stay here because God's saying to me Yericho. And he says once more, he says, by God and by your life, I'm not going to leave you. And they both go to Yericho. So the prophetic the professional prophets go to Elisha in Yericho. ויאמר אליו, הידעת כי היום השם לוקח את אדונך מעל-ראשך? ויאמר גם אני ידעתי החשוב. Right? And they say, did you know that today, same thing, all of these little prophets, they all know what's coming, and they're all kind of trying to give a little dig to Elisha there, and Elisha's like, yeah, I know, be quiet. Okay? It's very clear that they don't know, they have no expectation that Elisha is that big a deal. That's what you're getting from this. And then Eliyahu says, stay here. And Eliyahu keeps trying to ditch him also, right? Which is kind of disrespectful. And he says, stay here because God's sending me to Yarden. And he again says, by God and by your life, I'm not going to leave you. And they go together, right? So 50 of these kind of basic prophets go and they stand opposite, and the two of them, Eliyahu and Elisha, stand by the Jordan. Vayikach Eliyahu et adarto vayiglom vayakeh et hamayim. So he took his cloak and he wrapped it up and he hit the water like who? Like who?
Like
Who is the
Moshe.
water? Oh, and the water split, right? Like Moshe. Like Moshe, right? This is another situation where you're supposed to draw a clear parallel between Eliyahu and Moshe, right? And he hits it and it splits. And the two of them go in the middle on dry land, again reminding us of Israel leaving Egypt on dry land when the Red Sea splits.
Miriam,
Yes.
if you're making a parallel, I think the verse "Vayilchu shnehem" is also maybe hinting to
the Akedah.
I wondered. Yeah, I was thinking that. I think isn't the Akedah shnehem yachdav? Isn't that together? Isn't yachdav there in the Akedah?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so that's why I didn't want to push that one, because if it said Vayilchu shnehem yachdav, then it would be for sure the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. But
This clearly wasn't so Yachdav.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, they're not how together are they? I would say that Avraham and Yitzchak also, you wouldn't really think of it as Yachdav. I mean, I would think that saying that they're going together of Avraham and Yitzchak is kind of a stretch, but that's what it wants to say. So here we don't have that. word, if we had that word, I would say for sure it's a parallel to the Akedah, to the binding of these hearts, but since we don't have it, I'm not sure.
But it's also interesting that, there in the Chushneim Yachdav, two people went, one was supposed to come back and two came back, and here they're going together and one comes back.
Yes, that's cute. That's right. This is nice. It's a nice parallel / contrast. That's true.
I don't know what it means, but
That works. Yeah.
There might be another parallel here. There might be another parallel here. The way Elisha is succeeding Eliyahu is somewhat reminiscent of the way Yehoshua succeeds
Yes.
Moshe.
Right, and Yoshua splits the Yarden.
Yoshua splits the Yarden, so maybe the Yarden is sort of a bit of a metaphor here for this same type of succession that.
Well, especially because of what Elisha is going to do on the way back, right? So I was going to bring that up when Elisha does it, but yes.
And Yehoshua is a successor to Moshe, but a somewhat inferior one. And maybe the same could be said of Elisha as a successor
Right.
to Eliyahu.
Right, and it's unusual for a prophet to have a successor. So we have Moshe having a successor, and Eliyahu has a successor, and that's not a standard thing for a prophet to have. In any other situation, we can't think of a prophet that has a successor, right? So that also is a clear parallel. So so he splits it and they walk through on dry land. And then when they go through, everyone knows what's going to happen. He says, tell me what you want, what I should do for you before I'm taken from you. So he's got his request already. It's kind of a chutzpahdik request. He says, give me double of your spirit, right? And Vayomer, he said, you asked something pretty difficult. I mean, I would think, I'm not going to give you, how can I give you double? Like, how would that even be possible? And then he says, he says, if you see me taken from you, then you'll have it. And if you don't, you won't. Now, if this were a Greek story, it would end with him not seeing it, right? And losing everything. That's what would have to happen. but it's not a Greek story. So this is setting him up for success rather than failure. But you're like, oh, okay, so he's gonna miss it, right? So he's somehow gonna miss it. A board is gonna fall, and he's gonna turn, and then he's gonna miss it, and then he's not gonna get anything. But no. Anyway, but I can't help but think of, narratively what would make it a little bit more exciting. But haloch with the bear, and they're kind of walking and talking. And behold, there's a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and they separate between the two of them. And Eliyahu goes up with in like a storm towards heaven, right? The Elisha Elisha sees it. Says, my father, a chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And he didn't see him again. And Elisha takes his clothing and he rips it in two, and that's how you know that you rip kriya for the death of a teacher, right? So here, and so what is he crying out? My father, chariot of Israel and chariots of Israel, the horsemen. This seems to be a reference that he would help in war. In other words, that he in fact would be, and we do have that a little bit, that he would predict, would help with victory in war. Now, of course, that's not the traditional explanation. The traditional explanation based very much on Targum Yonatan, on the Aramaic Targum, the Aramaic translation, which is it's Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, which, unlike Targum Onkelos, frequently adds the translation. So it says, that your prayer was stronger than chariots, horsemen and chariots, in terms of helping Israel. That would be nice if we saw Eliyahu pray for Israel. We don't really. And again, you can say, well, we don't see him do much in terms of war either, right? I mean, there's a lot that we don't see. So you can say, well, that was off camera, right? That was off screen that he was praying. In the same way as it was off screen, one assumes a lot of his predictions of victory in war or assistance with victory in war. But clearly he's considered to be something powerful that has now gone, and not just someone powerful, but someone who's been a mentor to Elisha, someone that Elisha considers a father. So you have both of those aspects. I have lost a father, and the nation of Israel has lost this tremendous power that was helping us.
I'm wondering if
yes.
there's once again significance in the geography, because they're in Bet El, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is one of the tallest points in the country.
Well, they're not in Bet El anymore.
No. But they're starting in Bet El, which is one of the tallest points, is about 900 meters above sea level. They're descending 1,200 meters to one of the lowest points, to the Jordan Valley, which is 300 meters below sea level. And it's as if Eliyahu is ascending from heaven, not from Bet El, where he's sort of halfway there, but he's descending from the lowest point, from the Jordan.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it seems very clear that we're supposed to find meaning in the geography here. In other words, that path is supposed to be meaningful to us, right? I do think that some of it is a little bit parallel to Yoshua, some of Yoshua's like favorite spots, but also like it's moving backwards, and then Elisha is going to kind of take the path back, and he's going to be like Yoshua. So certainly that piece of it also is important. But I think that what you're saying is a really good point, because we can see that the geography matters here. Right, we can see that where he's going to and where he came from and where he's going to and where he's rising up from make a difference. So thank you very much for that point. So yeah, so here, okay, so Vayaremet Aderet Eliyahu. Sorry, Ido?
Regarding the place, I think he's going very close, maybe the same place as Har Nevo, where Moshe disappeared or Moshe died. I don't know what's the meaning of it, but it seems like the same place.
Har Nevo?
It doesn't say the word Har Nevo here. It doesn't say the word here, but first of all, I think tradition sees him as the same place. And also, according to the geography, it fits very well. I have to check it out.
I don't know. He started from Yericho, right? And then he goes to the Jordan, right? I don't know. What?
It crosses the Jordan. It goes to this. It's the area of Heshbon,
I think the places we've been hitting are much more like, if you talk about, we started in Gilgal, we were in Yericho, we're at the Yarden. These are kind of Yehoshua points, right? But I don't, and I think it could be like, I don't know about Har Nevo. I think traditionally it would make sense again, because you have all these great parallels between Eliyahu and Moshe. So you can say, okay, Har Nevo, but it's not. Har Nevo is not the Yarden, right? Which is where, like, I think that you're missing a different, like, it's very much a different geography. It's a different feeling, right? I think, like Donnie said, you're coming from a low point, right? As opposed to Har Nevo, which is supposed to be this very high point where you can see over everything. And it's very much also in Israel, because the point of Moshe being on Har Nevo, on Mount Nevo, is that he's not in the land of Israel. And Eliyahu is in the land of Israel. There's a very big point with Eliyahu and Elisha, especially Elisha, as we're going to see in the Elisha stories, about the importance of being in Israel. That the land of Israel has this holiness that other places can't match.
Har Nevo is also further southward. Har Nevo is opposite it's thought to be opposite the northern tip of the Dead Sea, and this is north of Yericho. Har Nevo is south of Yericho, and this is north of Yericho. So
the northern tip of the Dead Sea.
What's that?
Yericho is the northern tip of the Dead Sea.
It's a bit north of there. Just a bit north of there, but this is a bit north of Yericho, and Har Nevo is south of Yericho. So there's a bit of a distance there.
Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity to read some of the comments. So Susan says the Jordan split in the time of Yoshua. Yes, Yoshua splits the Jordan, and that's one of the things that we want to say, is that there's a parallel. There's a parallel, particularly when Elisha goes back and he splits it, because he is succeeding Eliyahu like Yoshua succeeded Moshe. And Moshe Matitya says, it's ironic that the tradition of tearing one's clothes upon the death of one's teacher is attributed to a story in which the teacher does not actually die. Yes, indeed ironic. But it's such a great, but his statement is so striking via Yisrael Parashav that I'll allow it. I think it's such a great, like, it's so emotional, that you do kind of feel like, oh, this is what one does when one loses one's teacher. Okay, so moving right along, I can already see that we're not really going to get into the Elisha stories this time, but we're going to get kind of into this transition here before we finish. Okay, so Elisha saw the whole thing, right? So Elisha saw it. So now he's going to get, now he's going to be Eliyahu's successor and be powerful. And he took up Eliyahu's cloak. He picked it up. Asher nafla me'elav, that fell from him. Vayashav vayamod al sfat hayardin. And he sat and he returned, rather. Sorry, sat. He returned and he stood on the edge of the Jordan River. Vayikach et aderet Eliyahu asher nafla me'elav vayaket hamayim. Right, and he took the robe just as Eliyahu had done, and he hit the water. Vayomer ayeh Hashem Elokei Eliyahu. Who he said, where is the Lord God of Eliyahu? Afhu vayaket hamayim vechatzu hena vehena vayavor Elisha. So also for him, when he hit the water, it split in two, and Elisha passed by. Now that's where you have the real parallel with Yoshua, to my mind, because he's the successor. So just like his predecessor, he can split the water. Again, remember, we came here from Yericho. That's what I'm saying. This is close to Yericho. So the prophets who were in Yericho saw him opposite them. Vayomru nacha roch Eliyahu al Elisha. They said, Eliyahu's spirit has come to rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him and they bowed down to the ground. This is a tremendous contrast with the way that they were acting before, right? Where they were like, hey, did you know something that we all know? And, right? That Eliyahu is going to go up, and he had to tell them, shut up, right? Now they recognize that he is their leader by far. Right. And the first thing they do, right, is they say, we've got 50 strong guys. They said, let's send 50 guys, because Eliyahu was taken up. Maybe he was taken up by the Spirit of God and then dashed somewhere on a mountain, in a valley. Let's go find the body, or him if he survived, right? Let's go find him. But probably they're expecting a body. And he says, no, don't send it, because Elisha knows what happened. They kept on bugging him until he's like, fine, send. So they went, they looked 3 days, they couldn't find him. So they returned to him, and he's in Yericho, and they tell him they couldn't find it. He said, I told you, don't go. Right? Again, they still didn't quite get that he knows what's going on. And now they know that he knows what's going on, and also that Eliyahu's body will never be found. Like whose? Moshe, right? His body will never be found like Moshe's body, but of course, in his case, we know that he went up in a chariot of fire. It's not that we just don't know where he's buried.
Apart from that, even when he was alive, Eliyahu had this habit of not being found when he didn't want to be found. He was only found when he himself wanted to be found.
Yeah. I mean, but in this case, it really does sound like they're expecting him to be dead. Like it's like they all knew he was going to be taken up. So what, you really think that he's going to be taken up and then like dashed to the ground? That's horrible, right? That's just terrible. But maybe, like, the truth is they don't know. It's all sorts of weird stuff happens. Maybe they're expecting him to just be thrown down and be alive there, being fed by a raven or something. So who knows what they're expecting? But they have But what's interesting is they were opposite. What this indicates also is that they were opposite when this whole thing happened with this chariot. They didn't see it, right? Remember how Elio says to Elisha, if you see it, you're going to get, right? And Elisha saw it. And it seems like these other prophets who were all standing right nearby didn't see it. Because they're like, oh, a wind took him up. It's going to dash him somewhere, right? It seems like they did not see what Elisha saw, right? And then the fact that Elisha saw it, that's what perhaps indicates that he was ready to take on this mantle of greatness, right? The fact that he saw it in itself indicates that yes, he can have this this doubling of spirit. Okay. Now, right away, I'm probably gonna let's just kind of jump to this. Right away, you get this little miracle story. Oh, I see. There's a question. So Ido says Har Nevo is right across from Yericho. Yam Moshe Mervod Moav El Har Nevo Rosh Pisgah Asher Pnei Yericho. Yep, fair enough. Fair enough. So Ido is showing us that in fact Har Nevo is right across. Mount Nevo is right across from Yericho. So that could be a parallel. Again, I find the parallel with because Nevo isn't mentioned at all, and what's being mentioned is Yericho and the Yarden over and over and over again. I find the parallel in that, with the geographic parallel with Yehoshua, much more striking here in terms of geographical parallels.
Can I just add something to that?
What?
I just wanted to add something to that.
Yeah.
Whether it's the same place where Moshe died or not, I think what's more important is that it's on the other side of the Yarden, that it's outside of Eretz Yisrael.
Yes, that's a good
and
point.
That Moshe had some fault, some failing, and as a result of that, wasn't allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. And Eliyahu had a fault and a failing, and because of that, he had to go out of Eretz Yisrael and then was taken away.
I wish I could agree. I don't agree with. Honestly, I don't. I think he's very much in Israel. I think he's very much in Israel when it happens, and I think that in general, in these stories, they wouldn't have had a miracle happen outside of Israel. This isn't Yechezkel, right? Yechezkel can have prophecy in Tel Aviv in Babylon, not our Tel Aviv, right? Tel Aviv and Babylon. But here, I don't think that you would have this description. Like, he's got to be in Israel. And he is in Israel. I don't think he's taken out of Israel. And also, I don't think that this story is juxtaposed with the failure of Eliyahu. I think that the fact that he has to choose Elisha is juxtaposed with the story of his failure to change and adjust, and now he has to bring in the next generation. But I think this story is saying how great Eliyahu is. So I don't think he's being kicked out of the land of Israel, and I don't think that you would have the idea of being taken up to God in a fiery chariot outside of Israel.
So
I think he's very much in Israel.
Wait, you don't see it as connected with what God told him at the Choref?
No, I don't. Because now again, I can't say that for sure, because I don't know what the original juxtaposition of different stories were in whatever sources we're pulling from, right? But in this series, that was ages ago, right? And there's been other stuff happening, and he's done other things. This is in fact what we would have expected. What we would have expected right after his failure at Chorev, which I think you can say the failure. His failure at Chorev is you would have expected him to right away go anoint the 3 people he's supposed to anoint and kind of disappear. Right? That seems to be what he's supposed to do. That's not at all what happens. Not at all.
Miriam,
like he kind of chooses Elisha. Yeah.
Ever Adam is, by most definitions, still considered part of Israel. On top of which, Eliyahu is Eliyahu HaGiladi. So he comes from Ever Yarden. It seems that when he's departing the world, it's as if he's going back to where he originated from his birthplace by crossing the Jordan. I think there might be some significance to that.
I hear that, but I don't again, Har Nevo, if you're thinking about it as a geographical location, it's meaningful because it's where Moshe is not allowed to enter Israel, right? Yeah. So in terms of the meaning of the place, that's why I don't like to connect. Like, again, first of all, because you have all these places that are all screaming Yehoshua, right? And also because Nevo is not mentioned at all. And if you mention Nevo, like it would be, if you mention Nevo, then I'd have to, then of course that we'd have to deal with the parallel. But the meaning of Nevo is that Moshe is not in the land of Israel. And Eliyahu very much is in the land of Israel here. And again, I think that it's very important in this, like, I don't think it's very important. I think it's taken for granted in the story that of course this is something that's happening very much in Israel where Israelites live, right? It's right near Jericho. He's going through different places where there are all these prophets, right? And he's kind of hopping different places, all places where everyone's living and that are important in the history of Israel and of Yehoshua, right? So that's why I don't now, of course, you can feel free to argue with me. It is, as Ido pointed out, it is opposite Jericho. You could say, well, it's at this point it's considered inside of Israel, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Now I'm just going to, before I finish. So Susan says there's something grating to my ear about hitting the water. It brings back the memory of Moshe hitting the rock. When it came to splitting the waters, neither Moshe nor Yehoshua hit the water to split the waters. Any thoughts? You mean that he like raised his staff and it split? Well, I don't know. It's harder to do with a robe. I think it's funny because that it describes Eliyahu kind of wrapping the robe up because you can't really hit water with a robe, right? So he like wraps it, like makes a thing out of it. And then you have to. It's hard to imagine it being very dramatic, right? Because it's like flopping all over. Like I can't imagine a robe being like. It's not going to be really amazing looking. When they split, it'll be cool, but it's not. They're not hitting the water with anything hard, right? They're actually hitting the water with something that you would not expect them to hit it with. So I'm just gonna. We're at time. I'm just going to kind of say that our next story is just this little miraculous vignette, and it kind of shows also that Elisha's role is going to be somewhat different. We're going to see him in Elisha has a very wide range of roles, but one of them is, of course, to help, particularly the B'nai Nevi'im, these prophets who are around in large numbers, right? But also the city. The first thing that happens, at least in this setup, in this chronology, is Vayomru anshe ha'ir el Elisha hinena moshav ha'ir tov kasher Adoni ro'eh v'mayim ra'im v'aretz meshakelet. He says, okay, the water's bad here, and he's like, okay, and he puts salt in the water, and he says, God says, I've healed this water, right? It's not going to be, there won't be any death from the water anymore, and the water is better, right? And then, so he the first thing he does, he comes out and he helps people, right? This is not the sort of thing we saw from Eliyahu, but it's right away juxtaposed, with the other side of this tremendous power. So on the one hand, we see him use this power for good, but just in case we were getting all warm and fuzzy about Elisha, we have the next story. He goes up from Bethel and he's going on the way. Small boys come out of the city. Right? And they mocked him. They said to him, get out of here, Baldy, right? Get up out of this town, right? So they're kids and they're laughing at him. Apparently, unlike Eliyahu, who had a lot of hair, he happens to be bald, which probably was not something he was particularly proud of. Prophets are kind of known for like letting their hair grow and stuff, and he is bald, and they're making fun of him, right? So he goes and he sees who's doing it, and he curses them in the name of God. But now he doesn't curse them with anything. He doesn't say, I will now kill you. He just curses them, right? But he curses them in the name of God. Something bad's going to happen. And in fact, right? So 2 bears come out of the woods and they rip them apart, 42 kids, okay? Vayelech Misham el Har Carmel Misham Shav Shomron, and then he went to Mount Carmel, and then he went from there to Shomron. Right, so there's no kind of conclusion there. What we're being told is, hey, don't mess with the prophet. Yeah, he can help you, all right, but you do something nasty to him, you are not going to like what comes out of it. Like, this guy has power, period. Right? If you get him angry, he can just call on the power, and then something bad is going to happen. Right now, of course, and I've mentioned this before, we have here the famous phrase "Lo dubim v'lo ya'ar," no bears and no forest, because what happens in Talmud is there's an argument here whether how much of this was miraculous. Was it that you had woods that didn't usually have bears, or were there not even woods? And after, of course, the miraculous, there were woods and there were bears, right? So lo dubim v'lo ya'ar originally meant that there was no forest and no bears originally, and then they happened miraculously. Of course, in modern Hebrew, this became, it never happened, right? Lo dubim v'lo ya'ar, there were no bears, no forest, it never happened.
It became the opposite. It became the opposite. It
became the opposite, but very much in the spirit of good old-fashioned skepticism of biblical stories, and of Chazal and of Talmud, right? So
sort of like the Yiddish of nicht gestoigen, nicht geflogen. It's again, there's an interesting parallel with Eliyahu before the story with the bears, with the salt in the water. It's a little bit like Eliyahu with the thing that happened on Carmel, telling the people to throw water onto the Mizbeach so that and that made the fire all the more dramatic. He's telling them to put salt in the water to sweeten the water. It's like homeopathic medicine. You're doing the opposite of what is intuitive in order to gain the result you want. So there's a parallel with Eliyahu, and then you get the story with the bears, which is very, very unlike Eliyahu.
And Robin, of course, has a picture of a bear up there. If anyone forgets what a bear looks like. So it's actually, there were bears in the north especially, and they were considered pretty dangerous. So that's the sort of thing that it's not in just a second, Cheryl, it's in the context of the story. It makes sense that there would be bears, right? But obviously they're not supposed to come out and like kill 42 kids, and that's the result of the curse. Yes, Cheryl.
So I want to go back like earlier in this story, is that a few things. How does everyone know that Elijah is going to be taken up in a
they're prophets, because they're prophets. That's how they know. They're all, it seems to be something that all the prophets know. They can all, I don't know, feel it in the air. It's a prophecy. They, oh God, all the prophets know this. You know, that's yeah.
We're not told that in any way in the text. It's
right.
Just, but there's also something about having a successor. Why does Eliyahu not want Elisha to be with him when he's taken up? And
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
People that Elisha, who has given up his life of wealth and family to be with I mean, there are two contrasting people at that time, but Elisha won't leave him, but Eliyahu doesn't want him there. So
yeah, it really seems like Eliyahu does not particularly want Elisha to be a successor, which it's kind of part of the whole kind of dumping on Elisha sequence, in that like up till the kind of not exactly transfer of power, but him like picking up the robe of Eliyahu, up until then there really is, everyone's kind of treating Elisha very very dismissly. Eliyahu seems to be trying to get rid of him, like he wants to do this thing without Elisha there. It doesn't seem, isn't the act of a mentor who wants this guy to be his successor.
Right.
Okay, it's very kind of in keeping with Eliyahu's whole it's just me against the world thing, right? And so it does feel like no one is recognizing Elisha's greatness at all, or potential for greatness, until he actually becomes great, right? And I think that also has to do with Eliyahu when Eliyahu says, oh, well, that's really hard, because Eliyahu doesn't know that he's, are you capable? I don't know. Go ahead.
He appoints him, but he listens to God and he appoints him. You said that's the
He
only.
barely, honestly, you say he listens to God and he appoints him, but if you remember the story, so Eliyahu meets Elisha, he's like, okay, come with me. And Elisha's like, let me go say goodbye to my parents. And he's like, okay, so forget it then.
Mhm.
You should be like, what do you mean forget it? Isn't this guy supposed to be your successor? Right? Eliyahu, okay, he blew it.
But I feel like Elisha knows if he's not there at the end, he doesn't get the power.
Yes. And I think we do too. I think we do too. In other words, you can feel it in the way Eliyahu keeps trying to ditch him, right? Eliyahu keeps trying to ditch him. And it really feels like, what does ditching him mean? Ditching him means you're not my successor because you weren't there with me at the end. Whether or not seeing it means something, this idea that you wait here and I'll go someplace else. And that's where this is going to happen. That's saying you're not going to be connected to the continuation.
The text also does not tell us why he's taken up in a fiery chariot.
Right, we're missing a lot. Like this is again, there are a lot of things that we're kind of missing. We don't get a background of, and this is why, right? And it's very much not like. And again, the succession to Elisha doesn't seem like a given from Eliyahu's perspective. Like Eliyahu's not like, well, now I must go and leave Elisha in charge. It doesn't seem like that. That's not the way Eliyahu's treating it. So we're missing a lot. I just wanted just a second. Let me see. Susan says, Elisha sticking with Eliyahu at the end is a reversal of Elisha's looser connection and asking to go to say goodbye to his parents. As a reverse, no, I think honestly, I really do think that Elisha, I think I have to say, I don't think this is mine. I think I heard it from Brian Levy that this idea that Elisha said, I want to say goodbye to my parents. And then he fed everyone was an expression of, I'm with the people, right? I'm not disconnecting myself from everything around me. That's not the way I work. And that's not the way Elisha works, despite his cursing little kids, right? He is very much part of what's going on with everyone. Whereas Eliyahu, when there's a drought for 3 years, he goes away, right? And he's on his own, right? He's not part of he's not part of solving a problem for them until unless God's going to tell him to do something.
But it's a contrast to Moshe, who asks for a successor.
Moshe is so sad. That whole story is so sad with Moshe. I mean, he just wants to keep going. He wants to go into the land of Israel. I mean, it's interesting because if you ever read,
But Moshe asks for the people if he's not going to be there.
Well, Moshe is very different in terms of the stories of Moshe and the stories of Eliyahu are different from each other in some major ways. So let me just actually kind of conclude and talk about some major things about Eliyahu, and then we're kind of wrap this up. So what we see with Eliyahu is he has these tremendous moments, right, that are tremendously meaningful in the way we see the prophet and his relationship to God, and in a way God's relationship to Israel. Right. So we have this idea that, God is angry, but he wants Eliyahu to reach out, right? He wants Eliyahu to do the job of speaking for the people. And Eliyahu can't because he's too zealous, right? But we have the different moments, right, where Eliyahu brings everyone to recognition of God through the miracle against the prophets of Baal. We have where Eliyahu goes up to Chorev and he has a revelation that tells us something about what God is, right? We have this tremendous moment where he's taken up by a chariot of fire. And those moments are kind of this height of, let's think about the prophet and his relationship with God, which is so close, but it also is supposed to tell us about our relationship to God, right? So I think that's why Eliyahu, with all the issues with Eliyahu, that's why Eliyahu is still the iconic prophet. And you can say, well, it's also because, in Malachi, it says Eliyahu is going to come back. Well, why is Eliyahu going to come back, right? And he's like, Eliyahu is going to come back and reconcile the generations. That's what Eliyahu is going to do. He's going to reconcile the generations. How? Why? Because he has this tremendous power and tremendous closeness to God. And this is something that he's called upon to do. And also perhaps kind of, as we mentioned, kind of as was mentioned in an earlier class, not by me, but by one of you guys, I don't remember who, but he himself has to do kind of teshuvah and kind of get to this thing where he facilitates reconciliation as opposed to kind of his standoffishness during his lifetime. So thank you very much for joining me.